It's time to bring out the next two competitors who are both currently 1-0 in the group of death, trying to advance on to the final round. Let us bring out our first player who just narrowly defeated a Gruul Dino deck with excellent Esper control play. Let's welcome to the stage from Finland, Savjz. Yes, welcome. Rocking out that Esper control and mono white, one of the two most popular combinations here. The other most popular combo will be run by the opponent from the United States, the 2014 and 15 Magic the Gathering Player of the Year. Let's welcome Mike Sigrist. No one trying to go too off meta for this tournament. It's Esper mono white versus Esper mono red. Gentlemen, good luck, have fun, and please to your stations. Let's head over to the commentators for this match.
All right, thank you very much. Day 9. Looking forward to seeing Savjz and Mike Sigrist going up against each other here. Esper control. So again, we're seeing a control mono red and control mono white matchup.
Yeah.
So it seems to be the standard in this tournament.
Yeah, I think
players bring the control and the aggro.
Yeah, definitely coming into this tournament, you have not really seen a lot of mid-range strategies. You've seen players bring control and aggro. Taking a look here at Savjz's list, we have, I mean, a pretty standard Esper control deck. This is the type of list that a lot of people have brought to the tournament. He is actually playing 2 copies of Kaya or Savjz here to try to close out games a little quicker, because we've seen this deck sometimes take a while to be able to close out those games.
And of course, playing the Masterminds acquisition, just the 1 copy of that to go digging in the toolbox of the sideboard.
Right, and we've seen Mastermind's acquisition get all kinds of cards. And one thing to keep in mind, by the way, not only can you look through your sideboard, you can also get cards out of your main configuration as well. So, you know, if you need to find the Kaya's Wrath, which is often not a card that you see in the sideboard, you can still do that with the acquisition. So, extremely flexible, but at the same time, we have seen at times it being a little bit slow, so a little bit on the slower end against the aggressive matchups in the field.
All right, let's take a look at the mono-white aggro list from Savjz as well. Pretty standard. I see a lot of mono-white decks either choosing to run the Skymarch Aspirants or not, as the case may be.
Right.
But yeah, this seems pretty much in line with the rest of the mono-white decks that we have seen this week so far.
Yeah, the only thing of note here in this list is the going down to only 2 Conclave Tribunals, because you can have the chance of playing against a deck like Esper Control, where the Tribunal doesn't really do a whole lot.
Yeah.
You can't afford to have too many dead cards in those matchups. So instead of going for removal effects, Savjz instead choosing to play more threats and more copies of Unbreakable Formation to be a little more proactive, because that's kind of the name of the game in this best-of-1 environment.
And already we've seen Unbreakable Formation in Cedric Phillips' game, saving him from a board clear. So definitely a good card for the mono-white deck. Let's take a look at Mike Sigrist's list now. This is his Esper control, running 2 Masterminds acquisitions as opposed to just the 1. Anything unusual here?
Yeah, so one thing that I want to point out is the singular copy of Ixalan's Binding here in the deck. Most decks often opt to play multiple copies of Vraska's Contempt instead, because, you know, it's generally considered to be a better card because it's an instant, it gains you some life. However, Ixalan's Binding is kind of that catch-all solution.
Yeah.
You know, there are decks that play cards like the Immortal Sun, and that completely shuts off your primary win conditions, which are Teferi Hero of Dominaria and cards like Kaya or Savjz. So having access to that singular copy of Ixalan's Binding can go a long way to kind of helping shore up some of those cards that really kind of shut this deck down.
Let's take a look now at the mono-red aggro deck from Mike Sigrist. Again, running the typical cards that you would expect to see in this list.
Yes, and as you can see, if you saw the deck list of the last match, Mike Sigrist basically has the exact same deck as Luis Scott Vargas, as they did test together for this tournament. So you have the same configuration. Of course, you have the 4 copies of Chain Whirl, 4 of everything, but it is choosing to shave on land. We have seen some configurations play 20 lands, because it is important to play, you know, your Experimental Frenzy on turn 4. And we saw yesterday the power of Experimental Frenzy and the nasty things that it can do if left unchecked. But yes, again, typical mono-red strategy here. The deck that you really want to be playing against when you're playing this mono-red deck is a mono-white deck.
All right, so let's see what the matchups do end up being. Of course, it is random in the first game as to which decks the players play and which player is on play and who is on the draw.
Yeah, and I want to talk about just kind of the primary reason to choose mono red and Esper control. Instead, the advantages of playing that over something like mono white and Esper control is, despite the pairings being random, there's always the chance, right? There's always the chance that your aggressive deck goes up against your opponent's aggressive deck. And in that head-to-head, the mono red deck is slightly favored against mono white. So by choosing to play a configuration where you have red and Esper, gives you a slight edge if you expect a lot of other people to go mono white into Esper control.
Definitely. So this should be a really, really good matchup, friends. I am looking forward to it. I can't wait to see who comes out on top. First of all, which games or which decks will be seen first on the stage.
Yeah.
If you were Savjz, which deck would you want to have first?
If I'm Savjz, I want to, it's not even necessarily first. It's more like I want to avoid the randomization element of this to the point where I don't want to be playing against the other aggressive deck. If I'm playing the white deck, I don't want to be paired up against the red deck. So what Savjz is really hoping for here is to have his mono white deck go up against Sigrist's Esper control deck, and then have his Esper control deck go up against the red deck. That way you're not just looking at a matchup where there's a head-to-head where he's actually just behind.
Now, going into the second match, I imagine the competitors are much more settled because it's a complete unknown in the first match. Okay, which deck am I playing? What's my opponent playing?
Right.
But going into round 2 or game 2, you know exactly which deck to expect. Does that kind of help just the mental preparation for the second round?
Well, the one thing that's extremely relevant after you know what your matchup is going to be in the second round is it does actively affect your mulligan decisions.
Yes.
Because now that you know you're exactly playing against a specific deck, you can either decide, oh, my hand is a little too slow because I know I'm playing against an aggressive deck, or hey, this hand needs a few more lands because I know I'm going to be playing the Esper control the mirror, and I just need to make sure that I can hit all my land drops and have all my card draw spells for the matchup.
All right, here are the opening hands. Let's take a look. We got Godless Shrine, Isolated Chapel in the opening hand for Savjz. And then in Siggy's opening hand, we've got Fanatical Firebrands, Vision Pyromancer, and Wizard's Lightning as well as 3 mountains. Pretty strong opening hands from both players.
Yeah, the thing with Sigrist's hand is, it's kind of lacking some punch. You do have a nice little curve and you have the lands. I imagine he's going to keep, but he does need to find some of kind of the more powerful cards in his deck. Cards like Light Up the Stage, Experimental Frenzy, and Goblin Chain Whirler. And, if you kind of go back to what we saw earlier with Savjz's hand, his hand was fantastic for this matchup. It looks like I'm not sure if he decided whether or not he wanted to keep this hand, but this is a very polarized hand. This is the type of hand where if you end up getting paired against an aggressive strategy, yes, this hand is fantastic.
Yeah,
but if you're playing
against,
but if you're playing against the Esper Control Mirror, this hand does nothing. It's got no blue sources. Even if you draw Absorb, you're not going to be able to counter anything, and this hand is just chock full of removal spells. So, and this is what's interesting about the nature of this format. It's you're not sure. Your opponent can just be queuing up in a control deck against you, or they can just be on the aggressive deck. So,
no blue source yet either for Savjz. So thankfully,
exactly.
no absorbs or anything like that he has to worry about, being unable to cast. So, yeah, I think he might just risk it here and say, sure, I'll keep this and hope that I'm correct.
Well, it's just one of those situations. Sure, you have your lands, and the control matchups, you do have a little bit of time to kind of draw out of it, right? You can draw some lands, draw some card draw spells, but at the same time, this hand, if he does the 50-50 chance where he does play against the mono red deck, his hand is fantastic. It's so hard to lose with this hand if he just draws reasonably for the rest of the game.
Board clear, life gain, exile, he's got it all, so.
And not only that, you might also want to consider the player matchup. Mike Sigrist was a former player of the year, one of the best players. He's in the MPL. He goes, all right, this hand, if you're playing the red deck, I know I'm going to beat you. I don't care how good you are. So maybe he's just going to be like, hey, I'm just gonna take that shot here and just keep this hand.
All right. So a few final preparations before we get this match underway. It is Savjz versus Siggy in what promises to be an epic matchup.
Yeah, and I will say I haven't seen Savjz play too much, but I was very impressed with how he navigated that last match. He was even upset with himself with, kind of some of the lines that he took, but ultimately ended up pulling out the victory. And that's kind of the hallmark of somebody who is going to be very good at this game.
Yes.
Because learning from your mistakes, punishing yourself, and being like, look, I know I won this game, but even in those wins, you have to look back and think about, what are the things that I did that I could have done better.
Yeah.
You know, was my sequencing proper? Was it correct? I had a Teferi Emblem. Should I have cast my Chemister's Insight ahead of time to get some of those Rhythm of the Wilds off the battlefield, or maybe even my opponent's lands off the battlefield so that they can't draw that Carnage Heron off the top and play it for the win? But, you know, despite that, still very impressed with the way he played his matches.
Certainly. And I will say, like, even just watching from the sidelines, I don't play Teferi very often, so I completely blanked on the fact that when you draw cards, you get to blow stuff up.
Oh, yes.
So when I saw that play, I was just like, oh, that is awesome. It's amazing. Here we go, friends. We are underway, both hands being kept. And I'm pretty sure when Savjz sees this mountain, followed by Frank, the Fanatical Firebrand, he's going to be very, very happy he kept
Oh, yeah.
that
This is like an internal fist pump. You know, he's like,
yeah.
yes!
Yes!
Got the, and one thing that I want to note, by the way, with Savjz's list, many decks play a 2-mana removal spell split that involves Cast Down and Moment of Craving, because Cast Down allows you to kill bigger creatures.
Yeah.
Savjz is playing the full 4 copies of Moment of Craving, thinking to himself, you know what? Nobody's going to bring these big green creature mid-range decks. So, you know what? If that's the case, if I only expect a bunch of small creatures to be attacking me, Moment of Craving is a far superior removal spell because it gives you access to that life gain, which is very, very crucial in both this matchup and against the aggressive white decks.
So Siggy going in for the swing, responding to the Moment of Craving with the Wizard's Lightning, saying, sure, you can kill my guy, but I'm going to zap you for it anyway. Fanatical Firebrand's getting in for the 2 damage there, as well as the Wizard's Lightning.
And look at this, Mike Sigrist is just down to a singular shock in his hand.
Oh yeah. I will say that is the one disadvantage of the red deck, is if you don't get your Experimental Frenzies, you will run out of steam eventually.
Right.
So he's got to hope that his next few draws are the Experimental Frenzy, so he can get that on the board and just keep digging cards off the top of his library.
Yeah, and look at what the double of Moment of Craving effectively did here. It allowed Savjz to gain 4 life after killing those creatures, and that basically completely counteracts one of the or more than one of the burn spells in Mike Sigrist's deck. So look at the Skewer to Critics. Savjz, if those were cast downs, would have been sitting at 7 life.
7 life, which is dangerously close to death when you are facing off against a red deck wins.
I think we might see a Vraska's Contempt here on a Fanatical Firebrand. just for the life gain, you know, you gotta gain that life.
Here comes a better target in the Runaway Steamkin, so I think as soon as this hits the board, maybe the Vraska's goes for it here. No?
Oh wow, and look, Savjz actually choosing to take the 1 point of damage here, and basically, you know, telling Mike, look, if you play another creature here, I'm gonna get my value. I'm gonna go to Value Town here with my Kaya's Wrath.
But the Vraska's Contempt finding a far better target in the Runaway Steamkin, which can, in essence, run away with the game.
Okay, so it looks like he's just choosing to fire off the Contempt here instead, which is pretty interesting. So now he has the question, now there's a question of whether or not he wants to run out this Kaya's Wrath. And I think you do. You're not really going to get more value here. The red deck doesn't have the ability to put a bunch of creatures on the battlefield, especially now that Mike Sigrist is down to 1 card. So I think I'd be looking to fire off that Kaya's Wrath because he also just doesn't have mana to cast Absorb. He's only on 1 blue mana source available right here.
Goblin Chain Whirler hits the board, and this will make the Kaya's Wrath feel a little better. It always feels bad using a 4-mana spell to get rid of a 1/1.
Right, but keep in mind he did have the backup Kaya's Wrath, and again, Mike Sigrist just doesn't have a whole lot of other threats on the battlefield, and you really want to preserve your life total in this matchup.
So there's the other blue source for Savjz. We'll be able to cast the Absorb next turn. Gets your Lava Runner getting in for 2 damage, still holding on to that shock.
Yeah, very good draw from Mike Sigrist, but an even better draw potentially here from Savjz here with the Kaya Orzhov Usurper off the top, which you can use to get that D2 Lava Runner off the battlefield. And I think Mike Sigrist is going to have to shock this Kaya here because Kaya provides a source of continuous life gain over the course of this match.
Very dangerous against this red deck. Runaway Steamkin off the top, gonna hit the board. No mana up for the Absorb there.
And Savjz looking great here. He now drew land number 6. This allows him to play Teferi, +1, draw a card, and untap and have mana to cast Absorb next turn.
So Sigrist is now top decking, looking for answers, and a Mountain's not gonna do it. He really wants to find his Experimental Frenzy here. That'll help him just, you know, in terms of card advantage, because that is a big, big factor in this match. If you're sitting there top decking while your opponent's just filling their hand with a whole bunch of nope, you're in for a bad time.
Yeah, for Mike, he's certainly looking for something like that Frenzy, but with that Absorb in Savjz's hand, it's going to be really difficult. He has to do something like draw multiple copies of Experimental Frenzy to try and get out of this.
Okay, Teferi just ticking up, drawing cards, tapping lands. Kaya's Wrath getting rid of that runaway steam.
I have all these cards, I need to use them somehow, so he's just firing off that Kaya's Wrath because he does have that safety net in Absorb in hand.
Oh look, something to kill. Oh look, another thing to kill. Oh look, something to absorb. This is where the Esper deck really does tend to run away with the game.
And in this specific matchup, Absorb is effectively what I like to call a 2-for-1 in this matchup, because not only are you able to trade 1-for-1 with a card, gaining 3 life is effectively negating one of the spells that Mike Sigrist can play, because the mono red deck is playing tons of 3 damage spells in their deck. Lightning Strike, Wizard's Lightning, Skewer the Critics, cards like that are all negated just by a singular Absorb.
Alright, so light up the stage does help refill Mike's hand a little bit. Runaway Steamkin hits the board. Not a whole lot in Savjz's hand to deal with it. I think he's just going to keep ticking up. Fairy. Keep drawing cards, find another removal spell perhaps in Vraska's Contempt.
That's exactly what he wanted here.
Hello.
He did string together some lands here, and now he has the ability to emblem the Teferi next turn.
Do you think Mike would go for the Skewer the Critics on Teferi? There's no counter spells in Savjz's hand. Or does he go straight for the face?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think he's just going for the Teferi because he thinks it's extremely likely for Savjz to have a removal spell for the Steamkin.
Yes.
So you cannot take the risk there of going for Skewer the Critics to targeting Savjz and then attacking Runaway Steamkin onto the Teferi, because Savjz has been drawing multiple cards over the course of the past few turns, and he's got 5 cards in hand.
Here comes Vraska's Contempt, exiling the Runaway Steamkin and gaining Savjz 2 life. Sigrist now showing, I only have a mountain in hand.
And the reason why Mike Sigrist is running out all those lands is, of course, if at any point he does draw that Experimental Frenzy, he can then have the ability to play lands off the top and then continue just chaining together spells, because that's honestly the only way he can come back into this game.
Oh, Mastermind's Acquisition. What does Savjz want to grab from his toolbox here?
Yeah, let's take a look from Savjz's side here, what he's going to consider here with Mastermind's Acquisition. Take a look here.
Mirari Conjecture, maybe? That's
I'm a fan of just going and getting Lyra Dawnbringer. That kind of closes out the game. And on top of that, when you look at the mono red deck, you need multiple removal spells to be able to get a Lyra Dawnbringer off the board. But Savjz going for some style points here, getting Mirari Conjecture, which then allows him to get back Absorb, which now he has up for a possible Experimental Frenzy. And I actually think this was the correct play, because this Teferi is going to ultimately win the game for him. The only way Savjz loses is if Mike Sigrist draws something like Experimental Frenzy off the top and then plays a bunch of spells afterwards.
Siggy's had enough. He can see the writing on the wall, conceding it to Savjz, who takes the first game in this matchup. He seems quite pleased with himself, I'd say.
Yeah, he's like, good keep, good keep. Moment of craving, great.
That could have gone terribly for him if that was the control matchup.
Yeah, because look at how that hand shaped up throughout the course of that game. You know, he was lacking blue mana, continued to draw more Kaya's Wrath. If Mike Sigrist just had a hand where he went turn 2 search for Azcanta or Thought Erasure into Teferi, he could have been in a lot of trouble. But now, we know the matchups.
We get to see the inverse of what just happened in the mono-white deck versus the Esper control.
Right.
Who do you think is favored in this matchup? We have seen mono-white run away with a few games just by getting out all those 1-drops, convoking, and just going sideways and smacking face.
Yeah, so I had the opportunity to talk with some of the MPL players and just ask them about that specific matchup and how they feel about the matchup. And they felt that the Esper control deck was a slight favorite in the matchup. Not a gigantic one by any means. Of course, the aggressive white deck can certainly get draws where they go creature, Legion's Landing, flip Legion's Landing, and that's of course extremely difficult to deal with. But overall, you know, with the combination of Kaya's Wrath, Cry of the Carnarium, Moment of Craving, you know, it's just all of those cards add up. Of course, on the other end of the spectrum, the Esper control deck has draws that can be clunky at times, right? Cards like Chemister's Insight and Teferi are extremely slow, and those are the types of cards that kind of pull you further ahead in the game, but early on, they don't do a whole lot. They have very low impact in the game.
So taking a look at the opening hands here, 2 planes, Snubhorn Sentry, 3 Benelish Marshals, and History of Benalia in the opening hand.
Yeah,
Going for the mulligan. I think that was possibly correct.
I kind of like the mulligan there. That hand did approximately 0 damage over the first 3 turns of the game, so that's not something that you can afford when you play against a deck like the Esper Control deck. You need to put early pressure, and now Savjz opting to keep a 1-land hand, but of course, he does get a scry and chooses to scry a Plains on top.
Siggy's hand on the other side looks pretty darn good. All the color sources there. We have turn 2 Thought Erasure if needs be, Cast Down as well, and Kaya's Wrath when the 4th land source is found.
Yeah, this is kind of like the perfect hand. This is the kind of hand that you're kind of happy in the dark even. It doesn't really matter what you're playing against. You have some early interaction, you have the Thought Erasure, you have your win condition into Fairy, but you also have cheap removal in Cast Down and Kaya's Wrath as well.
All right. Another Kaya's Wrath in the hand for Siggy, passing back the turn, Plains off the top for Savjz, who will swing in for the 1 damage before playing the Tithe Taker.
And I want to point something out here. This is a slight heads-up play from Savjz. Oftentimes, players will just run out the more powerful threat. So, for example, oftentimes players will run out Dauntless Bodyguard on turn 1 instead of something like Legion's Landing. But, for example, if you know the matchup and you know that your opponents are going to be playing, spot removal or sweepers, oftentimes it's actually correct to play a different 1-mana creature, maybe even something potentially weaker in Legion's Landing, so that you can follow that up with a Dauntless Bodyguard later, so that you have the ability to protect one of your creatures through a sweeper.
But in an aggro match, you certainly want to get your heavier hitters down first. So.
Absolutely.
Another Thought Erasure on the top there for Siggy. I would imagine he'd be quite happy to get rid of those unbreakable formations.
Yeah, however, Savjz doesn't really have a gigantic board presence, but I think it's pretty close because if he does choose to keep the Thought Erasure on top, it's almost certainly going to be able to take one of those formations, but the question is whether or not he thinks he can actually afford to play around them.
Oh, Venerated Loxodon, but unfortunately no other land source for Savjz to be able to play that just yet. But that Thought Erasure just got a whole lot better. Because, of course, the Venerated Loxodon is one of the key cards for this white deck.
I think he's going to actually let Savjz keep the Loxodon because what Mike Sigrist actually wants is for Savjz to draw a land next turn and convoke out the Loxodon so then he can follow that up with Kaya's Wrath.
So Teferi in the bin, playing the Hallowed Fountain tapped.
Wow.
Still no other land for Savjz, drawing the 3rd copy of the Unbreakable Formation.
Right. So now Siggy can have the ability here to just fire off one of his first Kaya's Wrath here. Savjz does not have the ability to play Unbreakable Formation to save his creatures.
No.
Savjz will still get a 1/1 token here, but the thing is Mike Sigrist doesn't really have too many other options here. So it looks like he's just wanting to use his mana here, uses the Kaya's Wrath because that Tide Taker is a pretty annoying threat to have on the battlefield.
Definitely, yeah. Especially for the instant speeds.
Exactly.
Part of the Carnarium is another really good draw, but Kaya's Wrath is just going to dispatch of the Spirit Token as well as old Snubby.
Yeah, and this is the type of draw that you hate seeing when you're the white aggressive deck, when your opponent has the 2nd sweeper. Oftentimes you can try to navigate the game where you play around the first one, but if they have the 2nd one, it's generally backbreaking. And that's what we saw in the replay earlier where Mike Sigrist played against Reed Duke where he just went sweeper. Oh, by the way, another sweeper. And usually that's going to be the game in the matchup.
All right, so Teferi, hero of Dominaria, hitting the board now. Drawing land, untapping, leaving the cost down, playable if something would happen to hit the board. Now, Legion's Landing will, of course, replace itself. Does this little guy get hit with the cost down?
I think it's possible. I mean, the thing is, Siggy can still choose to wait here and fire off the cast down on his turn if he really feels like he needs to, then untap with the Teferi. But at the same time, the mono white deck, unlike the mono red deck, doesn't have what I like to call reach, which is spells that allow you to kill your opponent by dealing direct damage. The white deck doesn't have that. It just has a bunch of creatures. So as long as Mike Sigrist is able to navigate through the game and just make sure that there's not enough sticky threats on the battlefield, he can just slowly use his life and the loyalty on Teferi as a resource carefully and, choose to take a couple of points of damage if he really wants to try to get a little extra value and help and hope that Savjz puts a little more pressure onto the battlefield.
So the 1/1 Vampire just chipping away at the life total there, gaining Savjz some more life in the process. Unfortunately, no other land draw just yet to be able to get this Loxodon on the board.
Yeah, and this is one of the worst hands I've seen from an aggressive white deck. Look at that. Just 4 virtually uncastable cards in Savjz's hand. But both Unbreakable Formation and Loxodon, fantastic cards if you're able to litter the board with a bunch of creatures. But given that Mike Sigrist fired off 2 sweepers and there's nothing on the board, these creatures are just looking, these creatures and spells just look like they don't do anything right now.
Now Siggy has drawn the Mortify, but there's no real threat from Legion's Landing flipping, because everything that has hit the board has just subsequently died, so he can hang on to that to get rid of perhaps a Loxodon if needs be, but still Kaya's Wrath, Cry of the Canarium cost down, so many answers in the hand for Siggy.
And Siggy goes, oh no, he's going after my Teferi. So now Mike Sigrist wants to end the game here by trying to get to that Teferi emblem as quickly as possible. So he is actually choosing to use Cast Down here to try to get that Soldier token, the Vampire Soldier token, off the board.
So the Soldier token lives via Unbreakable Formation. Siggy's going digging through his library to see what he can see, and it's more land.
But Mike Sigrist firmly in the lead here. Active Teferi sitting at 7 life, but look at his hand. He's got Absorb, Negate, Wrath, multiple hand disruption plus multiple counter magic. He just basically has it all.
Yeah. What does he go for here? The Unbreakable Formation?
Yeah,
like,
because
I want to kill your stuff.
Because everything else kind of operates at sorcery speed, and Mike Sigrist already has sweepers. So the only thing that's kind of annoying to play around is Unbreakable Formation because it is an instant.
So Savjz is a little bit on the back foot here. Quite a lot, actually.
A lot of it on the back foot.
Needs to find something, but here we see another Legion's Landing. Will is getting negated. Let's find out.
No, because Mike Sigrist knows Savjz's hand, he knows that Savjz at this point kind of just has to go for the Loxodon here. So he's going to let that resolve so Savjz can actually convoke out this Loxodon and then follow that up with a Kaya's Wrath.
Complete board clear. That'll be devastating. But first, I will Cast Down.
Interesting. So this tells me that he's going to fire off Cast Down here, use Cry of the Carnarium to sweep up the rest of the creatures, and hold on to that Kaya's Wrath for a later point in the game.
Teferi now at 8 loyalty. He can ultimate next turn if Siggy chooses to do so. Cry of the Carnarium, getting rid of those 2 lifelink tokens, and just now taking complete control of the board here.
And Teferi now sitting at 8 loyalty.
Ooh.
We are 1 turn away from the emblem.
Savjz says no, not today.
Savjz goes, nope, you are not going to emblem me. I'm going to hit that concede button before the emblem goes up. So we're going to get to game 3.
There we go. So now the players get to decide which of their 2 decks they wish to play. If you are Savjz, do you go back to the Esper, just being what seems to be the more reliable deck of the 2?
Right. I think there's not a lot of decisions to be made if you're on Savjz's side, because if he does choose to play the white deck, then there is a chance that Mike Sigrist submits the red deck. And from that matchup specifically has the red deck being slightly favored because of the powerful Goblin Chain Whirler. So as a result, I feel like he just simply can't risk playing the white deck on the possibility that Mike Sigrist chooses to play the mono red deck. So as a result, I expect him to choose the Esper Control deck. But Mike Sigrist, knowing that, might also choose to play Esper Control. And at the same time, it's unclear if you maybe want to play an Esper Control mirror against one of the best players in the world. But in terms of just matchups, it just makes more sense for Savjz to choose to play the Esper Control deck. Also, it's been treating him pretty well so far.
Yeah, I think his plays have been pretty outstanding, especially with all the added pressure of being on the big stage and being in a tournament fighting for their share of $1 million. So let's see what the opponents, what the players have chosen to do battle with. Here we see the opening hands for Savjz. He is on Esper Control, and it is an Esper Control mirror. Both hands have Search for Azcanta in them.
Yep. Both have Search for Azcanta. However, Mike Sigrist does have the answer in Search for Azcanta with the multiple copies of Mortify in his hand.
Savjz does have the Syncopate as well. If he can time it correctly, he can get rid of a pretty big threat on the board. Both Search for Azcantas now active, scrying at the top of the library. Wanting to get as many things in the bin as possible if they're not useful, like the creature removal spells or the like, or similar.
Yeah, and given the coast is clear, Savjz can actually just run out a turn 3 Kaya here just to start ticking it up. It's not going to be doing a whole lot now, but you could ultimately just have a Kaya with a ton of loyalty. And by the way, if Kaya stays on the battlefield, Mike Sigrist is not going to be able to flip that Search for Azcanta because Kaya will be able to eat all the cards in Mike Sigrist's graveyard turn over turn.
That's really good in the mirror match. So Mortify dispatching on Search for his Kanta on Savjz's side.
And both players choosing to cast their spells when the window is open, when the other player is tapped out, because of course both decks are playing counter magic. Cards like Absorb, Syncopate, and Negate means that if your opponent's tapped out and you have the ability to interact with your opponent in some way, that's when you go for it.
All right, now in terms of advantage, we do have a Search for his Kanta taken over. We do have a Kaya getting rid of all the spells that Search would be chucking into the bin. So who do you think's on the upper foot? Who's got the forefoot here?
Despite Kaya having the ability to eat Mike Sigrist's graveyard, renting a flip from the Search for Escanta, Search for Escanta actually does something in the matchup right now. Search for Escanta actively allows Mike Sigrist to put all those useless dead removal spells on the top of his deck into his graveyard. This means that on average, Mike Sigrist's draws are going to be a lot better than Savjz's because he's going to be like, Kaya's Wrath, nope, Absorb, yup. Cast down, nope. Negate, yup. So he's just going to keep doing that over the course of the game, and he's just going to be able to, sculpt a very, very powerful hand. Meanwhile, as you can see, Savjz drawing Moment of Cravings, which don't do anything in the
They're
matchup.
not going to be helpful. Yeah, he needs to find a Chemist's Insight to help filter his hand a little bit. Siggy now deciding what he wants to attempt here. Also has a Fairy in his hand, but won't want to play it until he knows the coast is clear. Haven't seen any 40 Rages yet.
Right, and as you can see here, Mike Sigrist is very, very familiar with the control and control matchup. Oftentimes, the first person to flinch is the person who ends up actually losing. Because the common sequence, if you go for that Teferi, if you just try to jam it on turn 5, is counter your Teferi, untap, play my Teferi, game. And that's exactly what would have happened if you chose to go with that Teferi. So, Mike Sigrist actually choosing to play it patient, waiting to see if Savjz is the person who goes for the Teferi, or alternatively, Mike Sigrist would be looking for something like a Thought Erasure to be able to clear the way for Teferi. And as you can see, Savjz right there, you're kind of bemoaning the fact that he's just drawing all of his dead removal spells. He's like, oh, Kaya's Wrath, Moment of Craving, Kaya's Wrath. None of those cards do anything because, of course, both decks completely creatureless.
Thought Erasure now making an appearance in Mike Sigrist's hand. Is he going to take a peek here? I'm pretty sure he would.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it's also possible, by the way, that Mike Sigrist tries to wait until he has 7 mana available, so he can set this up all in one turn where he can go Thought Erasure into Teferi. But this also just gives him a lot more information. And actually, the Thought Erasure currently will resolve because Savjz actually only has a Syncopate as the counterspell in his hand, and he can currently Syncopate for 4, and Mike Sigrist can actually pay. So at this point, Savjz probably should just let it resolve and keep up that Syncopate or that Teferi.
So now Mike Sigrist has all the information he needs with regards to Savjz's hand, and I think he'd be a little more confident now, seeing that there's not that many threats in Savjz's hand.
Right, and given that Savjz no longer has that Syncopate in hand, Savjz might feel like, okay, you know what, I think I'm behind at this point. Mike Sigrist has been able to filter through his deck with that Search for Escanta, find all the good answers. I think I might just need to run this Teferi and hope he doesn't have a counterspell, because now that Mike Sigrist knows Savjz's hand, he can just safely go for that Teferi next turn because Savjz only has 1 draw to find a counterspell for Teferi.
Savjz has found the Absorb, which is not known to Mike Sigrist now, so he could risk it here and say, okay, I'm going to attempt to play my Teferi here, but that's very risky.
And this was a fantastic draw because if you just play it by the numbers, right? Mike saw your entire hand. You have 1 unknown card in your hand, okay? Given that, you run out your Teferi and you're pretty happy about it. But Savjz actually drew Absorb here.
This is going to be a big
there's
turn.
A really good shot. Mike Sigrist just goes for the Teferi next turn because if he does, he has 6 lands in play. And if the coast is clear, he can go Teferi plus untap lands and have Absorb mana on the following turn.
Let's see what happens here. Kaya's still getting rid of the graveyard of Mike Sigrist, putting things into exile, now sitting at 9 loyalty. I'm not entirely sure how many cards are in exile, but she could punch him for a pretty penny there.
Right. Although Mike Sigrist might also be thinking, okay, something's a little fishy here. I just Thought Erasured my opponent, and I took the last counterspell out of their hand. Why didn't they run out the Teferi? Did they draw a counterspell? What am I going to do here?
So let's see. Teferi does replace himself in Mike Sigrist's
hand,
hand,
and look at this Absorb off the top from Savjz in the last turn. The last unknown card. Look at Siggy's face. He's like, this is just the correct thing to do because there's only 4 Absorbs in the deck. But now Savjz is able to counter, follow that up with a Teferi, and try to claw back into this game.
Here we go. Teferi has hit the board. Will he want to... I think he just wants to plus it here.
Oh, he's
just
definitely plussing
Yeah,
here.
just try and find some more answers.
Probably
at
going to
the
find another
library.
absorb, to be honest.
Yeah, that would be ideal for him if he could find that.
You know what?
Let's see what's
I'm
on
not
top.
done yet.
A land, unfortunately, for Savjz. Oh, wait.
That didn't go according to plan.
Kaya getting rid of the other Teferi, now sitting at 10 loyalty. And Teferi able to untap 2 lands.
Yeah, and at this point, Mike Sigrist does need to just run out that other Teferi and
Yeah.
hope that Savjz didn't find another counterspell off the top of his deck.
Yeah.
Use the Teferi to tuck his opponent's Teferi.
Oh, Vraska's
Ooh,
Contempt, though.
that makes things interesting.
Oh, now it's getting spicy, friends. Vraska's Contempt can get rid of one of these Planeswalkers. Who's the bigger threat here? The Teferi
Yeah, but
or
I
the
think it's
Kaya?
still correct to run out that Teferi because Mike Sigrist knows of 4 cards. As you can see on the little eyeballs, all the eyeballs means that Mike Sigrist actually knows those are the cards in Savjz's hand. So he only has 1 unknown card. So he's going to run out Teferi minus because Vraska's Contempt has another great target. Check out that Kaya on the battlefield with 10 loyalty.
She looks super threatening. Able to hit Mike Sigrist twice with a -5/-5 ability.
Right. And if Mike Sigrist, and given that Savjz drew a blank here, drew a land,
Yeah.
Mike is going to be able to take over this game. He's got all the answers. He's got the Absorb, he's got the Vraska's Contempt, and he's the one who's drawing a card every turn. As you can see, Kaya, you know, not the most impactful Planeswalker
not
because,
at all.
you know, sure, it's okay at maybe finishing out the game, maybe dealing with some graveyard, getting you some life and creature
Yeah.
matchups, but in the head-to-head against Control, it takes a long time before she actually is able to win the game.
Yeah. But if left unchecked, like we saw yesterday, she can
Right.
get the job done.
Definitely.
So more land off the top, plus into Teferi. Let's draw, see what else we can find for Siggy. More land. No land. Behave. Running out the Drowned Catacomb. Now it's just a bit of a waiting game, right? Now you're just seeing, okay, let me see what threats Savjz may have. I have my Absorb, I have my Vraska's Contempt to deal with Kaya when I need to. Mortify as well for search for his Cantor.
And as you can see, Mike Sigrist setting a stop on Savjz's upkeep here, because if Savjz does have something like a counter spell, he wants to tax Savjz's mana on his turn. So this is kind of a slightly more advanced play that you see from seasoned players where, you know, they sequence their spells in such a way where you can make it so that, you know, your opponents have to tap out on their turn. And that's kind of how the control matchups want to play out.
Savjz finding the search for his Cantor, but Sigrist does have the Mortify in hand, so he will be able to deal with that.
Yeah, however, it is extremely important that Mike Sigrist is able to deal with this search for Azcanta, so there is a possibility here that Mike Sigrist waits till his turn to fire off the Mortify, especially because there's still 1 unknown card in Savjz's hand.
So finding another Teferi off the top of the library.
We need to move quickly.
Teferi on the board will draw a card. Another card of the Carnarium. A card that's not going to be doing much here. Where are the Chemist's Insights? I think
Haven't
we've
seen a
one.
single one from
Yeah.
either side.
Where are they hiding? Always on the bottom of the deck when you need them. There they are. So threatening the Mortify now, getting rid of the search for Azcanta. I will say the new card styles look so cool.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh, looks so
They
good.
are beautiful.
Jelly, I haven't gotten to play Magic this whole week. I want to get in there, man.
You get to watch all the
I get
magic.
to watch it, but I want to look at the
You want to
pretty-
experience it?
Yeah, I want the pretty things. Teferi now hitting the board on Savjz's side.
Here comes the Absorb, and now Mike Sigrist not only has an active Teferi on the board, but now he's going to get closer and closer to flipping
yeah.
that search for his Azcanta. What I can actually see Mike Sigrist do
Yeah.
is start firing off Cry of the Carnariums to fill up his graveyard
Yeah,
so
right.
that search flips. That actually just would make a lot of sense here. And here we go.
Yeah.
Got to put some cards in your graveyard.
I'm just going to imagine there's a creature on your side of the board. Don't mind me.
Kill your Sky Marcher Aspirant here, and then then kill your Loxodon.
Kill those 0/0 tokens of yours. How close is he now? A few more cards and he's good?
He has 6 cards in graveyard now. So if he just, whatever card's on top of his library, he puts that in his graveyard,
Yep.
search for Azcanta will
Oh,
flip.
but Thoughty Rage is going to do it for him, so... There's another card in the graveyard. Teferi hits the bin.
And now Mike Sigrist firmly in the lead here. It's going to be extremely difficult for Savjz to get out of this, as Mike Sigrist now has assembled multiple ways to get ahead on cards. Not only does he have Teferi, not only is he going to flip Azcanta the Sunken
Ooh,
Ruin,
nice.
not only does he have an Absorb on top of his
Oh,
library, but he's
that's
going to be
just-
able to activate that Azcanta the Sunken Ruin
Hold that
multiple
thought.
times in a turn, because Teferi, Hero of Dominaria, has the ability to untap lands at the end of turn.
Yep. And Mike can also play the second surge for his Kanta and decline to flip it, just allowing him that scry every turn as well if he chooses to do so.
Yes.
It's one thing I learned, when a land flips, it's not the same thing.
Right. But choosing not to play it this turn because he wants to have the mana to absorb and also activate Kanta the Sunken Ruin. So if he does run it out, it will likely be next turn.
All right. So Kanta now taking a peek. There they are. There are the Chemist's Insight as well as Mastermind's Acquisition. That's a pretty tasty selection there. What would you go for?
I like Mastermind's Acquisition here. I like Mastermind's Acquisition, probably going for Mirari's Conjecture, getting additional counter magic to just try to lock up the game.
Keep up the pace.
And certainly in this matchup, you won't want to be digging in your toolbox for a creature because Savjz basically has a whole bunch of creature removal spells, so we won't see that. Pretty sure it will be the... Oh, he's contemplating something else. What you off?
Oh, look at this.
Unmoored Ego.
He's going to go Unmoored Ego and name Teferi Hero of Dominaria. Get all the Teferis out of Savjz's deck.
All right, here we go. Savjz cannot do anything in response, unfortunately.
Mike making sure he taps correctly so he has absorb mana up here.
There we go. Oh, spell it right.
Teferi. Teferi, not a card.
There we go. It's his second cousin twice removed. Yeah. There we go, finding all the Teferis.
All the Teferis are now removed from Savjz's deck. So he does. Chemist's Insight is really the only way that he can continue to draw cards over the course of this game.
Yeah. That's a pretty big deal there for Siggy, getting rid of those Teferis. Teferi also being the only other thing, barring Vraska's, that can get rid of his Teferi on the board, so.
Right.
Kanta now digging for more presence.
Look at this. More counter magic. This game is going to be over. I mean, this game is effectively over now. It's just going to take a little bit of time for kind of Mike Sigrist to go through the motions at this point.
Yeah. So let's see what he chooses to do. He's got so many options.
He can run out the Surge.
He can do Surge, he can do Chemist's Insight, whatever he fancies. He's just endless options in his hand currently. Thought Eraser as well. Let's take a peek and see. I know it's in your hand already, but I'm going to make you bin a few. Untapping the lands.
Yeah, and Siggy opting not to use Thought Erasure as he does know the contents of Savjz's hand here, and so Thought Erasure not really going to get a relevant spell.
But for the next turn, not knowing what that card is, we might see it. Let's take another look with Kanta. There's an Absorb. Thank you very much.
Another Absorb, and Mike Sigrist firmly in the lead, very close to embleming that Teferi Hero of Dominaria.
I think as soon as we see that, if Savjz is not drawing anything to help him here, we might see a concede, but let's see what happens. Another Mastermind's Acquisition.
And that patience paying off on the Thought Erasure because he actually did get a relevant spell there in the Mortify, because now he can safely play a Surge for Kanta if he wants just an additional way to kind of filter through the top of his deck.
Discarding the creature removal spells which aren't helpful in this matchup. And Vraska's Contempt in Savjz's hand, but unfortunately 2 Absorbs and a Negate. Half of those spells are known to Savjz, so he's going to have to try and find a gap here to get rid of that Teferi, but he's going to be emblemming pretty soon.
Yeah, Savjz may be waiting for an upkeep effect here on the Vraska's Contempt, but it's not going to matter, of course, because Mike Sigrist has access to plenty of mana here and 3 counter spells in hand.
Savjz taking a risk, seeing if he can get Teferi off the board, but met with an Absorb. Not today, Vraska's Contempt, not today.
Now we're going to see a Teferi emblem.
How many have we seen so far in 2 days?
Good amount, I want to say. Good amount.
20.
With each turn of the clock, your reality will
Glacial
crumble.
Fortress hitting the board. And another Chemist's Insight. Siggy really does just have the freedom to go digging at whatever speed he wants to. Savjz, good game. Good game response from Mike Sigrist. And Mike Sigrist is advancing. Congratulations. Well played, gentlemen. So, the Esper Mirror coming down to Teferi yet again.
Yeah, I mean, the Esper Mirror really, you know, honestly, a lot of it boils down to just who draws more relevant spells in the matchup, because, you know, I want to say at least a quarter of the deck is just a bunch of removal, and they just don't do a whole lot. So Mike Sigrist was the one who was able to get the ball rolling there. He had the Search for Kanta, and despite it not having the ability to flip, because Savjz didn't have a Mortify to get it off the board, over time, Mike Sigrist was able to just, you know, make sure that he always just had far superior draws than Savjz, because we saw a sequence where Savjz just drew 3 removal spells in a row, and that was the pivotal point of the
Super
match.
unfortunate not finding the canvases inside, but
Right.
let's hear from Mike Sigrist now, handing it over to Becca.